early start, the early start staff. And the districts, you know, every district is different. Some districts suck it up. And when it comes to speech and language, we're still the provider. And so we're kind of hurting ourselves.
Yeah.
We're
not, they have their own.
What we're trying to work out is, what does an assessment mean? And you don't have to do a whole nother formalized assessment if the early start team has just done that. Your assessment can be a review of records, observation, that kind of thing.
Well, what they're asking for, basically, bottom line, is speech and language therapists are saying, we don't know how to work with 2-year-olds.
Too bad, you know, that's wrong.
So you guys need to do this
That's
standardized
wrong.
assessment.
They're just not used to it. They are trained, they're just not used to it. You know?
Sorry.
Yeah.
We've
We've heard all
always done
that,
that.
too.
We have we both, San Benito and Santa Cruz, we're now vendors for SARC, so we do all the assessments for the regional center.
How can you afford that though? They don't pay anything.
Yeah,
We
well,
got out of that business
Well-
2 years ago.
well, you know, I'm headed towards
For
out of it,
regional
but I'll just
center.
answer a question for them.
We're
But we use the
contracted.
BDI, I'm sure you know that. That's a standardized test that the Battelle, is that right? Battelle?
Yes.
Infant and inventory, and we are required by SARC to use it. And then we hold a transition meeting, and we've trained our districts to like these little guys coming their way. And we've never done the converse where we did it all for the district. So in a way, it's the culture. You know, you're changing the culture, and it just takes time.
It does.
But and to answer your question about the vendorship, I wanted to run a lean and mean with an early start teacher and a bilingual speech therapist. But my business department at the county level won't let me, because the district's pressure is always to cut costs, right? So that if I use anybody else on the early start team, be it another early start teacher or another speech therapist, they charge part of their salary to that. So I'm barely making it, and you know, I'm wondering if I'm going to be in the black this year, and it's almost not worth it.
In our situation, we are fortunate in that we have an excess cost bill back model. And we also, for all of our districts, do the initial Part B assessment on the preschoolers, in part because the thought is we have the team who understands how to assess the little ones, and it's more of a dynamic assessment. And it works well for us. So far on our early start program, we're running pretty close to within cost in black. But our regional center is giving us a fairly decent amount for each assessment. And so it's working. The piece where we're gonna get the little pushback, and we're also the preschool special ed program, so we're serving them. The piece where we're gonna get, I think, a little bit of pushback is on the other end at transition. We're looking at how can we do something that's a little bit more of a formal type assessment at that transition point. And right now, my teams are talking about possibly if we can figure out how, with the DRDP as a standardized tool, making sure that goals really are more in line with the DRDP, and looking at parts of the what I lovingly call the baby brigades, but we'll see.
Yeah, this actually came to a head for us when we had a speech therapist go out on mental health leave, and she didn't come back. And so it became an issue because we were down on a person and scrambling.
Anyone else working with early start or special ed preschool in that assessment component and the transition of the districts?
We deal with that, although it seems like a lot of our districts, I guess, over time have been, they actually really want to do their assessments.
Yeah,
and
we're
so
finally
they-
getting to the over the
Yeah.
hump where they want to.
yeah, they have their preschool teams, because we have some large districts that we work with, where they have a whole preschool team assigned to just doing that, and they also do then the preschool to kinder transition, so they're kind of doing both sides of that. And then some of the smaller districts, they will take a lot of our assessment results and maybe do another record review or some small, because it's so vague on what's required that they sort of kind of take what we've done, because it's pretty extensive, and then we'll do a little bit more to add to it, but that's pretty much what we've experienced. The districts do want to have some ownership, we found that because they, yeah, oh yes, and so they sort of, we've gotten more of them wanting to take ownership than not. And sometimes we think, why do you have to do that much more? Because we've given you a lot of information. Because sometimes that can slow down the process.
Can I ask a follow-up, John? I know you were waiting patiently, let me go first. Sorry. When. What am I asking? Never mind, I lost what I was gonna say. So,
It'll come back.
It will.
John?
I'm just wondering if anybody is in the business of contracting services to districts such as APE, speech. This is a simple question.
We do ideology.
we do.
Okay.
It's a pain.
That's the
That's
first thing I just
really
needed
that's
to
your
reiterate.
answer.
And
Whenever
what
they
makes
have
it a pain in the neck?
The problem is because of your people,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
I'm being asked to explore this by my superintendent because we want to be innovative and do things. And I ran into a really bad problem. This year, I had a district commit via email to services, including 0.8 of an APE, and then they changed their mind.
Oh, no, you
I
have
have an
it.
email commitment, I can go after them, but that's my customer too.
Yeah.
So you have a really sticky situation. I had, the same district did something else with a teaching service that I was gonna offer.
We kind of do that with, OIs, or I mean, OT services. We have two districts that we provide OT service to. But what we did was we got a commitment with the superintendent's signature on a memo of understanding at the beginning of the year so that they know they're paying for that piece.
I think you have to go into it, and we did that, we went into an MOU in place before we even hired the person.
Yeah.
But it is
It is a pain
It's-
because I don't wanna become therapy 360 and all those
Right.
things we get from the agencies. Cause if that person goes down or hits lotto, then I don't have, I'm trying to find the most rare of credentials out there because I'm committed to get.
or if they do something wrong, they come back to you and they want you to get rid of the person. And
Right, you don't have that one else.
That's your employee, you
Yeah.
have to go through your, you know.
Yeah.
We do that and have run into that issue where people have said, oh, we looked at our budget again, we went through our audit, and we really can't afford it, and we've only used email verification, and I've had to say to a couple of superintendents, and they've honored it, and I will see, I'll put out a, a query to see if they're not supposed to pick up that time, but otherwise you're on the hook, because we hired this person based on your commitment, and it is difficult, but
Yeah.
they've honored that.
Okay.
But an MOU probably is a much better way to go.
Does anybody else in the room do it?
Yeah, we do it. It seems like we're the middleman a lot of the time,
Uh-huh.
you know, and we're the ones that have to do all the running around. If that happens, if, I don't know, a district changes their mind, or if one of the people leave, or whatever it might be, yeah, we're the ones that have to scramble. You know, and then we're blamed as well.
You know,
For our county, we hired an APE teacher just for our programs.
Sure.
And speech and language, OT, PT, and APE is all in the districts. They find their own people. We provide vision and deaf and hard of hearing services. They've also taken the additional step to get their own deaf and hard of hearing people. So again, our deaf and hard of hearing specialists serves our programs, and the vision and the OI people are itinerant. But that's the stance we take and have been that way.
For the most part in Mendocino County, it actually has been goodwill because they do appreciate that we really are trying to look out for people who can't hire their own. And so it is a pain in the neck, and my business office does not like me to post a position without everything signed, sealed, and delivered first, at least by email. But it has generated more goodwill than that within our county.
I was just gonna say, we have some really small districts that we provide nursing, so part of our nurses and part of speech and also the psychologist a little bit too. And that seems to have worked out because it's been a long-standing kind of thing and we're gonna move.
Okay.
Speech and, or I mean, our psych and nurse services are on a contractual basis. We have to sign contracts.
Yeah, we need.
Where
Not
they,
outside an MOU.
well, it's really more like an
Oh,
MOU.
okay.
We call it a contract, but it's really an MOU
Okay.
where they decide how many days that they want of
Yeah.
psych and nurse time
Yeah.
at a certain rate. And the way it's been worked out for years is they have to let us know by a certain date, and if they tell us after that, too bad, so sad, you pay the higher rate, or you don't get it at all. And then they're locked in for that year, they can't back out.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
What if a person can't perform, goes out?
Or in some kind of leave.
Yeah.
Then it's up to us to find
Okay.
some way to
I
make it
had to
happen.
do that. So I had a psych who's not in the right position mid-year with all of our small schools, and I was getting emails from all of the superintendents. And so I had to work through with her, get covered and hired for it. So,
The rest of our itinerant services, we have it off the top line. So all of those other DIS services are regionalized services.
Okay.
So it's up to me with it to live within our budget and
but you feel a
place
little
and
bit like
hire and all that kind of
360,
stuff.
you do. Because like I had to work with particularly our small schools because they're on such limited budget. And so they say they really need 2 days of nurse and they're only can pay for 1 day.
Everybody
And then I
sign
have our
this?
team going, I don't feel like I'm providing quality of care. And so you end up having to do some negotiations, like I send out, all of the minutes, all of this, and I make a recommendation for them and say, I would highly recommend that you do 20, 40% FTEs. And then, and help them so that they can try and cover it.
I think there's something in code, and I wish Carol was here, that allows a small district, and I think it's less than 380 or something like that, to request the county office to provide services.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
It's
I don't
a,
know exactly what it is, I remember when I worked
is
for
that
LA
under
County.
the direct service?
Yeah, we used to
Ed
be
code
asked, when I was in
section?
LA County, we used to
Anybody
be
know
asked all the time. But you might want to check with Carolyn. She may
Yeah.
have to off the top of her head.
I'm not trying to persuade you either way, I just kind of wanted to vent a little bit here. And so in our situation, all the schools run their own programs, special ed programs, but we provide the services, psych services, nursing, and all that kind of stuff. So we'll come in and do the assessments, make all the recommendations, and then they decide to do what they want to do. And then, so we have to add a mental health component for our service providers, because they get all disgruntled. I'm one of those service providers. So.
Mental health service to your staff?
I mental health service to myself all the time. Yeah. What was the last part of that? It was really good.
The assessment, make the
The
recommendation.
assessment.
Yeah.
that
Yeah, but then they just pretty much do what they want to do, and then it comes back to blame, where when it doesn't work, it's our fault, or our people, or whatever, so that might just. Yeah.
And our presenter just left me a message. She's on her way. She actually went to Yolo County for some reason instead of coming here. She
Okay.
apologized, but she said she's about 14 minutes out.
Okay, not bad.
Well, I remembered my other question.
Okay.
It's about the difference in eligibility for kids who are speech and language impaired from early start to district programs. There's such a huge discrepancy between who qualifies under speech, and we are asked constantly, well, can you hold on to this kid through summer? Can you help, and we used to also do that, but I feel like I'm just such a hard ass. It's like, sorry, no, But our population has mushroomed so much, and there are so many kids who would benefit from ongoing stuff that probably are gonna end up, like with autism or something, but they haven't been diagnosed yet, and so they're trying to get them in with speech and language. Do you guys anybody just say, yeah, well, they can stay with us after they're free because
Stay with who?
with early start?
No,
No.
And when I have speed, it would just be basically a gift we do, and
no,
I don't feel
No.
comfortable.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
You gotta be
that's
hard.
a slippery slope.
yeah, that's what I think, it could end up being a lot of kids,
No good deed will go unpunished.
I'm just saying. Oh, no, but thanks for asking.
We understand.
Oh, my God.
We have some of our speech.
I need one of those handbooks of nice remarks.
That will be Carolyn's party gift to her.
Some of our speech folks will, after, in that situation, student who's not helping, we'll put them on school base and still serve them that way, but I think that might run, preventative discrimination, suits that way, so I was, say, let's not do that, but
But
they do
you
anyway.
would run your preschools too.
There's state preschools,
Okay, yeah.
but we serve all of them, we serve everybody in town.
Because our districts actually provide all those services to the previous year. We
Our
can early start them and do, school age, but the districts and preschool.
None of our districts have preschools, they don't see kids until they come and check them. Okay.
So any other EASL topics that come to mind for folks? We've got all of our challenges solved. Yes,
Did everyone
all
see
of
your-
our,
I have a question while we're sort of waiting around. Now that my SEPA director is retiring, pause. The district directors are now talking about looking at a different funding model. We've been at 100% utilization for like 3 years, which I think has been not a very good model. So is anybody out there, could you share what kind of model you're running? We used to be 50-50.
For your services at the county?
Well, the county, yeah, for the AB 602 funding model.
50-50,
Well, I mean, we used to be off the top,
You're
like
off the
17,
top.
yeah. But then they moved to 100% utilization with a
Define
composite and a
that.
compound rate. I don't understand it. I cannot, if you have a kid in one of our programs, you have to pay 100% of the cost.
right.
And
Right.
so now that, so what other funding models do you guys?
How would you fund it that way?
yeah.
So let me ask a different question.
Yeah,
Because I think what I'm hearing is something a little different than what you're asking.
probably.
So let's use Diana's program as an example. Okay, because you can't look at the JCCS programs because most of those kids should be Cs, so they're getting the county rate. You're getting the district rate for every one of your students.
They're not our students, they're district
they're
students.
Well, no, I mean, I'm
So,
clear on that definition. but-
So there has to be, so now let's go back.
Yeah.
Under the old funding stream, if the students were in attendance in your program, the money came off the top from finance into the county office directly.
Right.
It no longer does that.
From CDE. it
From
came
CDEs.
to you.
It no longer does that.
Right.
So do you have an agreement with your districts about sending those LCFF revenue dollars to the county for the kids that you're serving?
I imagine we do.
There's
Yeah.
2 ways you can do that.
Yeah, there are two ways.
And one is that the district and you can agree to have CE pass that money right on directly to you.
Right.
The second is that they can agree to have CE send the money to them and then they'll send it directly.
Well, we have the first option. I know that.
That's a better option.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a way better option because we don't have that option.
Yeah.
So now going back to the special ed dollars, it's, you can't think of it really as the 602 dollars. You have to just think of it as what are your expenses, what's your revenue, where's the gap? And then those are outside of that LCFF revenue.
Right. So, I mean, the reason I asked it is because I know we're headed for another discussion about an AB 602 funding model per se, although that's probably old terminology, but
No, that's still current terminology for us.
yeah, so, but I don't know what is out there other than what, off the top, which was what we were, and what San Joaquin, I think, is still, and so maybe some others, but
So the only other options are you build it districts.
yeah.
You invoice the districts, or you do it off the top. So it sounds to me like they'd rather go to a build a district model. Actually, they'd rather go to, you just pay for it all.
But
But
Exactly.
it sounds like they're wanting to go to a you build the district model as opposed to off the top.
And that's what our model is, and what I would suggest you look at, Sonoma is doing that same thing, I think that he was talking about that, but
Yeah.
what we do is we build them by the month. Don't build them
Oh,
incrementally,
no.
because that bill at the end of the year, for example, if you have two bills, it's like
Huge
a
amount.
$6 million bill at the end, boards go crazy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do it monthly, which we do,
Okay.
then it's more palatable to the boards.
See,
Well,
and
that sounds good.
we don't do it monthly, we do it twice a year.
we do.
And the reason for that is that we don't want the county office to have to subsidize us until the end of the year. But it's, the other part of that is that
Huge.
whole
Yeah.
anaphylactic shock when they get that bill, even though they.
They benefited from
Being at
those
the other end of
services.
that as the director, when I got that bill and had to go to the board to explain it in September, or in May, it was difficult.
Yeah.
This way, it's not near that.
I see.
Plus the fact, when they see it in that, and we actually keep the LCFF dollars separate from the excess cost. Because the revenue would come anyway, regardless. And so you need to just keep that separate, because otherwise, when they look at that as one total bill, if you're doing it that way, that starts them thinking, well, for that price, I could do that. And
Or
And you know what, that's exactly the mindset, because one of our largest districts proposed to take back the secondary, they have to give us an 18-month notice. And within the same week, they withdrew after they sat down with the budget people.
Yeah.
And they formally withdrew. So I think that's the dynamic that's going on about that. So yeah, I just need the information because right now we posted for a SELPA director. So if anybody's interested in applying, and so that's the one thing. And then with the new SELPA director, they're gonna start looking at different funding models or funding, whatever.
allocation.
Yeah.
I have a
It's-
question about that. You said it comes directly to us, do you mean to SELPA or to the county office? Because ours comes so SELPA and they allocate to us, just like to a district, but. So I'm confused.
Okay, are you a SELPA? Is your county office a SELPA?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it comes into SELPA, but then we have the county office programs, which I run. which
The
we get an
$602 go to the SELPA.
allocation. Okay,
Right.
The LCFF dollars would go from whatever agreement you agree to, would go from either CEE to the county office, or it would go to the district and then pass.
okay.
It really boils down to what becomes the billing, your local plans finance model for how the funds are going to be distributed, be they 602. In our county, there is a small part of actual property to the special ed. And then, of course, the agreement now that LCFF dollars are going to the districts, but within that agreement, how everybody agrees to use those funds in the same way, regardless of who's operating the regional programs. The piece where we're seeing some difference of opinion, and for us, it's the governing council is, all the superintendents sit on the governing council. And that has to do that our original excess cost guidelines had this throwaway phase about any other revenue attributable to the program. Some of the districts, and these guidelines were written up pre-LEA Medi-Cal billing. So some districts took that went into that LEA Medi-Cal billing arena and didn't necessarily see that as being falling under that other revenue attributable to the programs. So that's where we have to tease it out. But it really, Carolyn, it sounds like it's pretty simple. There either is the SELPA agrees, we're gonna take it off the top, or we're gonna have some type of excess cost billing model.
Yeah, there's only two options.
Yeah. But neither of them are gonna, nobody's happy in either model. You know, you can't have everybody happy in either model.
And that LEA billing is a tough one because you don't get those dollars right up front.
No, that's right.
Those dollars are in the rear, so you don't wanna really report
Well,
that.
Yeah, and we
because
don't.
of that. But we do have a return dollars to the districts each year, and give them an option of either putting those dollars forward to the coming year for their bill, or to take those dollars right away. And it's many times over $1 million.
My hope would be that the governing council at least decides to address LEA dollars in some fashion in the next go round so that there's consistency. But that's my personal.
Here's, I think Dennis and I have a caution about that. And even with Diana's program, you know, her program is relatively new to doing excess cost, but we don't put the Medi-Cal dollars on the table because we do, as we go back to sure up, you know, then we drop those dollars back in. But the problem is, too many times we've seen folks who build those excess cost budgets and include revenue or anticipated revenue for Medi-Cal dollars.
Right.
And
Then they,
those are soft. And
Yes,
I keep those out of there. You want to make sure that you're dealing with the hard numbers so that you're not in a situation where you've built those in
Yes.
and then
And
suddenly you don't have them, or there's been an audit and now you're not generating because you're busy paying back.
Right.
The funds.
We have to make that change because they do project
Oh,
and, you know,
I don't know whether I'm proud of this or not, but we have never encumbered our general fund from the county office for our special ed programs. Our alternative ed program has, and it's been the money for many years, but we have never encumbered dollars from the general fund.
And is your JCCS program an excess cost model for special ed?
No.
ours is.
See, ours is,
Yeah.
that's your problem, is that,
Well, we just recently.
oh, well, that's an opportunity. So you may end up getting into that discussion
They may,
because,
yeah, they may.
Okay.
we could spend a whole unit
Yes.
on money.
Well,
What's
thank-
Sonoma do though? You guys just went through this, didn't you?
and would you
In
just like,
determining what your model would be?
For DHHP, I went back off the top for us.
Because it's always been off the top of everyone before, right?
Yeah.
And now you're gonna build that model?
Well, we were fee for service for our SDCs, the IPHH flip flop. We had a hostile takeover.
I remember that.
Oh, you do feel that way sometimes.
Took back over with the flip scoop.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for participating. This is always good food for thought. Those of you, thank you. Our presenter is here. If we need to, why don't we take a short 5-minute break just to take care of anything you might have. Leslie has put out snacks from last night in the back. Or Tangy, I'm sorry, it was, I'm sorry, Tangy. So
Tangy,
please.
we're not alcohol.
I was looking at the wrong person. So without. She was, okay.
Is that a Swede district?
She's been running through the implications doing the revised presentation,
Less
so
than
I
number being-
was surprised she was there.
Yes.
County office for services.
We use them in but then my preference is
we stop that. They now have to absolutely.
That's good.
It's every year. Or, that's very good. Yeah, I'm not minding it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yes. All right, if we can come back together. We have Suzanne Speck with School Services here to give us a little bit of information about May Realize.
All right, well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Well, first of all, let me just apologize for being tardy. I don't know if Leslie told you, but I actually went to the Yolo County Office of Education this morning. The last time I presented to the PASCO group a few months ago, and that's where it was, and I had it in my calendar, but that's where I was meeting with all of you today, so I apologize for being late. Leslie asked that I come and talk to the group, and I understand that you were most interested in the May revision in terms of, you know, what's happening in the state and local economy and with Proposition 98. And so I've brought with me today those sections of our May revision workshop, which we have been out delivering across the state this week. But there's 75 slides, and we have until 10 or so together. So no way are we going to get through all of that. So I'm probably going to go at lightning speed through some of these slides. And some of them may not be of particular interest to the group. But I do want to go fairly quickly. I might even skip through some of the slides because I'm sure you'd like to spend most of our time talking about, you know, what's happening with county office funding under the local control funding formula. What does it mean for county operated special education programs? And then there are some proposals in the governor's different from in his January proposal. In the May revision, the governor does have some proposals specific to special education. And so we probably want to talk a little bit about that. But if I'm going at lightning speed and there's something that you have a question about, we're a nice small group, please raise your hand, let me know. I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have. All right, that doesn't work. Anybody know why? Oh, there we go. All right, not the up and down, but the forward. Okay, I'm just somewhat challenged this morning. All right, so first of all, just kind of an overview. This is going to be another great year for public education. And so the governor has increased his projections for 2015-16 in the May revision significantly from where we were in his January budget proposal. So we're seeing a significant boost, and a lot of that is really being fueled by really a growing economy in California. You may remember that at the governor's January budget proposal, the LCFF gap closure funding was at 32.19%. And at that time was really the highest increase in funding for schools than we've seen since the early 70s. And that's up significantly, all the way up to 53.08% for 15-16. So for school districts anyway, a little bit different for county offices, but for school districts, they're seeing significant increases for 2015-16. Now that is in large part due to the state's economy continues to grow. We're seeing gains. Unemployment is on the decline, although not consistent across California. There are regions that are still having high unemployment. We'll talk about that in a minute. But everything in terms of the state's economy really is trending upwards, and of course that schools are benefiting from a stronger economy. Now, one of the things that I want to, maybe you know about, and maybe you don't, is that remember all the years of the recession? Who took the biggest hit in terms of the state budget? We did. Schools did, right? Every year, for many, many years, the state underfunded Proposition 98 or suspended their obligation under the Constitution to fund us under Proposition 98, that minimum funding guarantee. As a result, and the way the Constitution is written, there is a thing called the maintenance factor. And essentially what that says is that until we are repaid for everything that we were owed during those years that they suspended Proposition 98, we benefit from 90% of all of the new revenues coming into the state. So, under Proposition 98 in a normal year, we're entitled to 40%. But until that maintenance factor is fully repaid, we're getting 90% of all of the new monies coming to the state. That's significant. And that means that there is a lot of pressure. I mean, we're the envy of everyone in the state right now, because we're getting all the new dollars. And there's a lot of pressures on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget, because they want to benefit from some of this growth in the economy. So what's going to happen when that maintenance factor is fully repaid? Well, we're going to go back to just getting 40% of the state's new revenues. And so that's one of the things that we really need to think about as we move into the future. Are we likely to have a recession sometime between now and full implementation of LCFF? You bet. And so we believe that the maintenance factor likely will be repaid next year. So we're going to be living in this 40% versus 90% kind of world for a number of years, and we know we're going to have a recession. We just don't know when. Yes.
When you say fully paid, you mean back paid to the 0708 level. That's fully paid, right?
No, not necessarily. Fully paid is all the dollars. It's really a dollar amount that the state owes public education. And I think there's a slide a little bit later on that the state still owes public education like $778 million. So it's a dollar figure. It's different than when we talk about we're not going to get back to 2007-8 spending levels until full implementation of LCFF. That's a little different. And remember that every year the dollar in terms of getting back to 07-08, that's adjusted for inflation also annually. But these are just the true dollars that were owed to schools based on what the state borrowed from us during those lean years. Okay, so I think and there is a slide, it's about $778 million, and it will be, we believe, fully repaid next year, but we're still not back to necessarily 07-08 spending levels adjusted for inflation. So we're talking about equivalency in terms of our purchasing power. And because goods and services, the cost of those increase every year, when we say getting back to 07-08, it is still adjusted for inflation. Does that help? That makes sense?
Yeah. But then still next year, is it next year that Prop 30 goes away now?
Yeah, we'll talk about that too. It starts to fade away next year. That's right. So, yeah. One of the things that the governor has proposed is that the LCFF and really education funding generally is subject to sort of this kind of fluctuating economy. And the state's been doing a lot to try and create stability. The governor proposes for schools, rather than funding each year based on a fixed percentage that goes up and down every year and throughout the year, the governor proposed that there be a fixed dollar amount. So when the budgeting is enacted, if the gap closure is 58.03%, that number would be fixed and would not fluctuate throughout the year. And that would be great for schools because it would create some stability that we don't have right now. However, this proposal was heard in the Senate on Wednesday. It was a proposal that was rejected by the Senate because the state doesn't really want to assume the risk. Because let's say they fix the dollar amount and the economy starts to decline during the year, then who assumes that risk? The state does instead of schools. So they don't really, there wasn't an interest in the Senate to do that. We'll have to see what the Assembly does, but it's likely that the state is not going to want to create stabilities for schools if it means assuming more risk overall. So there are a couple things that aren't in the governor's budget. You're probably all familiar with the increase in pensions. The state, of course, and just certainly we have an interest in creating pension systems that are going to fund themselves, right? I mean, when we all retire, we hope that the promise that was made by the state is still going to be there, right? But employer contributions to STRS and PERS are on a steep climb to full implementation of LCFF, and there's been some effort to have the state recognize that puts significant pressure on public schools, and really the governor's promise to really restore the purchasing power of both public education and its employees. There doesn't appear to be a lot of interest on the part of the administration or the legislature at this point. We don't see any proposals to really relieve that pressure on schools for assuming those greater employee or employer contributions to STRS and PERS. So really, let's talk just briefly. I'll talk about the economy and then we'll get into the Proposition 98 proposals, because really it's the economy is sort of the underpinnings of the state budget. We're really benefiting from recovery that's happening across the country and certainly here in California. And as a result, revenues are strong. But Prop 30 is an important piece of that. We'll talk about that in a minute. This just shows you the gross domestic product for the U.S. and it's broken down in quarters. And I don't know how many of you are interested in economics, but strong growth in the economy averages between 2 and 4%. And if we look at the growth over the last 3 years, we're averaging at about 2.3. So it's kind of slow but steady growth. We do have some quarters that are up over 4%, and sometimes those kind of spikes in the economy are not necessarily healthy and can actually fuel some inflation. But overall, we see some pretty good growth. Now, what do you think happened in the first quarter of 2014 and in the first quarter of 2015? Really either low or below or negative growth in the economy. These are months where we had those really bad storms on the East Coast. And it just is such a reminder about how something that isn't happening across the country, but even in just one region of the country, can have such a significant impact on the economy. And so, while we are seeing slow and steady growth and we think it's good, we need to see multiple quarters of continued growth between 2 and 4%. So California's economy is doing really well. Improved job growth, residential home sales, all of those things are showing positive growth. And that, of course, is good for the state's budget. But there's still some concerns. How many of you have recently driven down Highway 5 through the Central Valley? I mean, when you just think about what are the effects of California's drought, we don't really know yet, but you just have to make that drive to know that it's not good for California's economy. Now, agriculture makes up for really only about 2% economy, believe it or not, but still is bound to have a dramatic impact, particularly on unemployment in the Central Valley. This chart just compares unemployment in California to unemployment across the country. And it's really just two graphs stacked on top of each other. So if you look at the far left-hand side, that 7.9% is lower than 6.5% on the far right. It's only because the graphs are stacked on top of each other. It's really intended to show how we really do trend along with the rest of the country where unemployment is concerned. But we're still about 1% higher, but we were about 1.4% higher, or a little more than that, at the beginning of this chart. And so, we hope that California will continue to have a decline in unemployment. Now, if you look at this, and it really illustrates what's happening in the Central Valley, while on average across the state, unemployment is about 6.5%, much lower along the coastal region, or at least some of the regions. Like if you look at the San Francisco Bay Area, you see unemployment even below the statewide average. But look at some of those counties in the Central Valley. Any of you live in the Central Valley? I mean, we're seeing like 12.9%, as high as 29% unemployment still in the Central Valley. And so when you think about the state's drought,
Yeah, is that Imperial at 19? Wow.
all the way down.
Very bottom yellow.
Oh, yeah. They're sort of an exception, but 19.9%. Anybody here in Imperial?
They went home.
They can't afford to
They can't
travel.
afford
They can't afford to travel. So we still have lots of parts of the state that just are not recovering at the same rate, and the drought is only going to impact those regions of the state even more. So that's still a concern. So these are the income forecasts for personal income. And if you look at it, it compares both the UCLA's forecast back in December of 2014 and their forecast in March of this year, as well as the state's projections for personal income. Look at what happens in terms of the forecast for 2016. In 2016, you see that the UCLA forecast in December 14 projected that it would be at about 6.7%. And then they increased their projection just this last March. But the state really didn't follow that same trend. The state predicted that in December of 14, personal income to be at 5.2%, and then they lowered their projection later in the year. And so, what does that mean? I think that means that the administration, just as they've been in previous years, is very conservative in terms of sort of their projections or forecasts for continued growth in the California economy, while UCLA is a little more optimistic. And some of that may be because of what's happening in terms of those Proposition 30 taxes expiring in the future. Let's look at the what's happening with oil and gas. Oil and gas has a significant impact on our national economy. People were saying the drop in the price of oil per barrel and lowering gas prices really will fuel the rest of our economy. And it certainly was welcomed, right, by all of us, particularly if you're a commuter. But as we saw the price of oil go down 50%, gas prices dropped about 40%, freeing up dollars for consumers to buy other kinds of goods and services. But look what happened when oil goes up. Oil only goes up 20% and gas goes up 55%. And so you're really, makes you wonder, who are the winners and losers in this sort of game. These are the general fund revenue forecasts for 15-16. And you can see a definite increase in the governor's May revision. Talked about the effects of the drought a little bit already, but we know that not only is that going to impact the economy in California, unemployment in the Central Valley, going to also make for a very, very dry fire season all across the state. And that's likely also to have a significant negative impact on our economy. You may have heard that there's some real interest in looking at the state's minimum wage. And to what extent that will impact us in schools, we'll just have to wait and see. But it's not unlikely that if the state raises the minimum wage, particularly for your classified employees, that there's going to be a lot of pressure to sort of the working wage of our employees. So let's talk about some of the political issues. I already mentioned that we are really benefiting because of that requirement to repay the maintenance factor. And we are the envy of the rest of the budget. And so, there is a lot of pressure on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget to kind of do this sort of Prop 98 hokey pokey, or want to take programs that used to be in Prop 98 out of Prop 98, and now they want to move them back into Proposition 98. And so while we see a gap closure in the governor's May revision of like 53.08%, there is some speculation that that's likely to go down at the enacted budget because of these pressures to move things under Prop 98. Preschool and childcare under CalWORKS being one of those areas that are likely that used to be in Prop 98 are currently out, but may be moved back in. All right, I have a couple of slides here that really talk about student achievement and its relationship to our economy. And don't want to spend a lot of time on these slides, but I just want to kind of give you the big picture. When we look at, how we fund our schools in California, far lower than the rest of the states in our country, right? I mean, we're still probably somewhere down around 46 in terms of funding. These next couple of slides really talk about, well, if we compare ourselves to others, how are we doing, or what impact does that have on outcomes for our students? And so if we look at spending by state, and here are just some other states that kind of look more similar to California, you can see that Texas, California, and Florida, we're not doing so well compared to the national average. And you look at some of the states who are doing a little better. And if we believe that our investment or the dollars that we spent on a per ADA basis were the only predictors of outcomes, we would assume what for both Illinois, Massachusetts, and New York? They're going to do better, right? Well, that's not always the case. Now, California does worse in when we look at national tests in reading and math. But look at reading. What happens to New York? They fall significantly. And so while they have the biggest investment, they're not getting the best results. Texas and Florida are doing better than California. Look at math. Texas funded lower than most of these other states, below the national average. They're doing pretty well in mathematics. And why is that? Anybody ever live in Texas? Well, we don't really know. The point is that it's not really, we don't. Although someone in our office the other day said they don't teach reading in Texas.
Are there more industries, technical industries moving to Texas, so families will be moving with kids that are more adapt to the technical aspect of?
I believe that's true, and that's what someone in our office said. And in Texas, there really is significant emphasis on like science and mathematics.
Become a Silicon Valley of.
Right.
Isn't Texas Instruments the largest calculator company in probably the United States? And all using Texas Instrument calculators.
It could be. I think the point though is that really, while we know money matters, right? That it's not the only predictor, and there are other things such as, the condition of facilities, class sizes, teacher training, all of those things, length of the school year, all of those other things also have an impact on outcomes for our students. So this is just one of our school finance cartoons, and just really meant to illustrate that we have, this will be the third year in a row, we have been the big winners in the the state budget. And so we would hope that we'd have some continued good years ahead, but we know that there are some lean times coming our way. All right. How we doing? Okay. All right, so the next, these next series slides are really all about Proposition 98 and all the details of funding for schools this next year. And so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Already talked about significant increase. The gap closure goes from 32.19% to over 50%, and we see some, significant new revenues coming to schools. Here's Proposition 98 over time. You can see what happened during those years of the Great Recession and see how far we fell in terms of our schools. And it's really a wonder that we are still standing at all. But you can see we've been the real big winners the last couple of years. The little orange bar at the top really just shows you the change from the governor's January budget proposal to his May revision. Not only are we having new dollars, significant new dollars in 15-16, we also see growth in the current year, significant growth in the current year. Now, does that mean that you're going to see any more money before the end of this year? No, it's going to come to you next year in the form of some one-time dollars. As I mentioned already, we believe that once the maintenance factor is repaid, and we believe that it could happen next year, that we're going to move from this 90% world to this 40% world. And so in the near future, and once that happens, we're likely going to see very slow growth, and probably in the range of 2 to 4% annually once that maintenance factor is repaid. This is just a summary of the changes from the governor's January budget to the May revision, and I'll skip over that. We have some more detail later on. Now, one of the things that was interesting that did happen this year is in January, the governor estimated the statutory COLA to be 1.58%. The statutory COLA has dropped to 1.02%. And if you look at the LCFF calculation, I mean, it does have some impact on schools, but because of the maintenance factor, we're still seeing much, much higher revenue. So in terms of, I'm going to go ahead and skip over that. We've talked about that already. Look at how far we've come since implementation of the LCFF. I remember when it first was adopted or enacted, and we thought about, well, how long is it going to take us to get to full implementation? 8 years seemed like a really long time. But look at where we are today compared to the trend line of sort of average steady growth to full implementation. We're essentially 2 years ahead of that sort of trend line. So we're doing pretty well. If we continue, if everything stayed the same, we could have full implementation within the next year or two. In fact, we're about 70% of the way there. But we know that's not going to happen because once the maintenance factor is fully repaid and those temporary taxes expire, we're going to see that kind of growth really level off. So here is what the effect of the COLA has on LCFF for school districts, not for county offices. Here are the different grade level spans, the COLA applied to that, and the dollars that school districts would receive next year if LCFF was fully implemented. But this is not what they'll receive. These are just the targets. Remember that once the LCFF is fully implemented, we will have true equalization state where every student will be generating the same dollar. Still, districts will receive supplemental concentration grant dollars for their neediest students, but will have true equalization of the base dollars. But they're only getting a percentage of this in 15-16. School districts are also receiving adjustments for K3 or TK K-3 class sizes, and also an adjustment for CTE in grades 9 through 12. And this shows those adjustments for next year. This also demonstrates, based on the number of students who are eligible for supplemental and concentration grant dollars, what those grants look like on a per ADA basis, assuming implementation. But remember, we are only part of the way there. This slide demonstrates really what that effect has on districts across the state, because not all districts are created equal. On average, school districts in California have about 63% of their students who are either receiving free and reduced price meals, or English learners, or foster youth, 63%. So those are kind of there in the middle, but there are districts with very, very few, and of course, districts who are close to 100% eligible students. And so the effect of that 53.08% gap closure is different based on your student population. And so, as you can see, the low LCFF districts stand to, get only about a 3% boost, or about $265 per ADA, whereas, those high LCFF districts stand to gain much, much more. And that certainly creates challenges across the state, particularly at the bargaining table. So supplemental concentration grant dollars, you're probably all very aware that those dollars, unlike the old categorical funds, they're not really restricted. They are discretionary dollars. School districts can determine the most appropriate use of those dollars, but the spending regulations really require that they be spent to benefit the students who are generating them. And so school districts have to perform a calculation to determine what percent they must be increasing and improving services to students with those dollars. So in that way, they're targeted. They're not really restricted like the old categorical programs were, but they must be used to increase and improve services to those students. Now, K-3 grades band adjustment, you're probably all familiar with this, doesn't really impact you so much, may have an impact on your programs when it comes to sort of mainstream and integration and those sort of things. But school districts really have to move to 24-1, and each year must make the same progress towards that target, equivalent to the gap closure. So that's significant for school districts this year. 53% or over 53% gap closure will make it very hard for some districts to meet their K-3 growth target this next year. And so many of them, some of them don't even have the facilities. We're hearing from a lot of districts, we don't have enough facilities to make that kind of progress next year. And what happens if you don't make progress at a single school? You stand to lose all of that money. So that is significant. It's very different than the old class size reduction program. And so many districts will be likely working with their collective bargaining units to try and get an alternative class size ratio to protect them from penalties next year. And so we already talked about that. Are you familiar with the cap on districts' reserves? Now, this does not impact county offices. Interestingly enough, there is no reserve cap for county offices. It was not a part of Proposition 2. But as oversight agencies, I'm sure that county offices are very concerned about this, really what we refer to as a stupid law. And so, there's been a lot of effort on the part of the education management groups across the state to try and get this repealed or get some kind of change. The truth is, if this reserve cap had been in place and when the Great Recession hit, we would have seen many, many school districts going bankrupt during that time period, but we didn't. And the only one we did see during that time was really not because of the recession, more because of mismanagement in the district. But nonetheless, this is a stupid law. Doesn't appear to be any interest on the part of the administration, although when Prop 2 passed, the governor made a commitment to continue to discuss the reserve cap. And remember that it was a poison pill for the governor to swallow. The governor swallowed that pill to satisfy CTA, so they would not oppose Proposition 2 in his rainy day fund, which really is will be one of the governor's legacies, I think. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any movement towards changing that reserve cap. Now, there have to be actually 4 conditions met for the reserve cap to come into play. At the January budget proposal, we believe that 3 of those would be satisfied in 15-16. But there have been some changes now in the governor's May revision saying that we are under Prop 98 Test 3 versus Test 1, and you don't even want me to start on what that means for Proposition 98. But nonetheless, right now, it looks like only 2 of those conditions will be met. However, it is very likely that if the economy continues on its current path, that the maintenance factor could be fully repaid, and we could be in a Test 1 year next year. So we still believe that all of those conditions could be met at the end of 15-16, making the reserve cap coming into play possibly in 16-17. So as I said, Proposition 2 and the rainy day fund is going to be one of the governor's legacies, and certainly we really have to commend the governor for buying down California's wall of debt. The governor, as you remember, he prevailed in November of 2012 and got those temporary taxes passed, and they have had a significant impact on our improving economy. There's no question about it. But those temporary taxes start to expire next year. The sales tax will expire in 2016 and property taxes in 2018. This chart shows both income and sales tax forecast all the way through 2018-19, even with those taxes expiring. And if you just look at this alone, you think, well, that doesn't look so bad. But if you look at the percent change based on the elimination of those temporary taxes, you can see a significant drop in those revenues. And we expect that they'll level off in 18-19. And as I said earlier, we do really expect that lean years are ahead. Once the maintenance factor is fully repaid, we're going to be in a 40% versus 90% world. And when those taxes expire, and if a recession occurs during that time period, it's going to be very devastating for California's economy. And, while we're sitting here in the current year thinking we're about to get the largest increase in history in California to schools, in 2 or 3 years, we could find ourselves in another, with the legislature suspending Prop 98 and taking money again from schools to balance the state's budget. So a recession is coming. We don't know when, but really hoping that it not come in the same year that those taxes expires. Is there a question?
Yeah, just a question. If we're headed for recession and there's a cap on, the cap that.
On district reserves?
District reserves. So that very high spike and then a very low, would you see more districts tanking? In other words,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
districts will not have enough reserves to get through that first year. They're going to have massive layoffs. They're going to have to ask employees to make significant concessions. They will not have enough money to survive the first year. And yeah, there will be a lot of districts that will likely go bankrupt. And that's the story we keep telling the governor and the legislature, but they don't really seem to want to hear. And who do you think really is behind the cap on the reserves? CTA. I mean, it is CTA. And why?
Because they want more money.
They think that they, ought to have today's dollars in their pockets, right? And so, and they are a very powerful lobby in the state. You all know that. So, you know, going to be a real challenge for school districts in the future. How many of you are close to retirement? Maybe you. The hands go up quickly, right? Let me get out before that comes, right? Yeah, yeah. So the May revision, because of the improving economy and some dollars coming in the current year, they're going to come in the form of one-time dollars next year. The governor is also proposing some additional one-time dollars. We had 1.1 million in the January budget. We're all the way up to 3.5 billion in the May revision, and that equates on average to about $601 per ADA. A lot of one-time dollars. Now, you probably remember a couple of years ago when we had some one-time dollars, the legislature designated them for certain purposes like Common Core implementation, for example. So the governor has some suggestions. You can use these dollars for professional development, instructional technology. You can see all of them there on the chart. But these are truly dollars, and every school district will have the opportunity to determine how to use those dollars. And there is some one-time money for county offices too, so we'll get there in just a little bit. I'm not going to spend any more time. Do you need me to spend any more time on the STRS or PERS increases?
It's too depressing. Yeah.
It's too depressing. Okay. You know it's all coming, right? There's still some categorical programs outside of LCFF, special education being one of them, and those programs are just getting the 1.0% statutory COLA in 15-16. So let's talk about county offices of education. You are going to benefit from some one-time dollars like school districts, and it's going to be to the tune of about 3.5 billion, up significantly too from the governor's January budget. These are expected to be distributed to counties on a per ADA basis, the same formula that was used in prior years for some one-time dollars, and they're really intended to assist county offices with the burden that oversight for local control accountability plans has really brought. County offices play a major role in approving those local control not approving, but essentially they do have to approve them once they've been approved by a local governing board. And that certainly has had an impact on workload in county offices across the state. So this is sort of in recognition of that, but they're not ongoing dollars for that specific purpose. They're just one time. Again, they're completely discretionary. County office wouldn't have to necessarily spend it for that purpose, but it is suggested. Yes.
It's also part of the reimbursement next year because it's part of mandatory reimbursements. If when you set it next year, what you just said about 3.5 billion, or what's the time frame for that?
Oh, the dollars that come to county offices. I don't.
What's the time frame for disbursement to the county offices? What time are you looking at?
Oh, it's for 2 years. The dollars are I believe it's for 2 years.
Beginning next year?
Beginning next year.
I have another question.
Yes.
Just long-term for county offices, even though there's a acknowledgement for, what they're doing, basically they've pretty much been stripped through LCFF. In other words, the categoricals are all gone. So long-term, do you think that there'll be a consolidation of COEs, or that COEs will have to close? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and in fact, I really wanted to get through all of this so we could really spend some time talking more about that. So we might as well just do it now. And there's a slide in just a little bit that shows that county offices were fully implemented under LCFF in the first 2 years, and in fact, of the 58 counties in the state, I believe I think it's like 32 are actually funded above their LCFF target by as much as 125% of their LCFF target. So county offices are already at their target. And so they're not benefiting from all of these new dollars that are coming to school districts. The only thing they stand to get year over year is a statutory COLA. And if you're one of those county offices that is already over your target, guess what you're getting? Nothing. You're getting nothing, and you might not get anything for a very long time. No new dollars. Now, school districts might say, well, you've been getting all this money all along to operate these programs. They don't probably have a lot of sympathy for you. What does that mean for county offices? Well, how many of you can go the next, 8 or 10 years without giving an increase in compensation to your employees? None of you. None of you. And when districts are giving 5 and 6 and even more % salary increases, and all you're getting is a 1.02 statutory COLA, then at best it's going to cut and column and those kinds of things. Is that going to have an impact on you? Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of pressure, and I don't know what your relationships are like with your member districts, but I think your ability to continue to operate programs the way you do now will depend on really those relationships and the tolerance of your districts to continue to fund those programs and maybe even have a greater bill back so that you can give your employees a salary increase that keeps them competitive. Because what's going to happen if you can't? They're going to leave, right? They're going to go get a job somewhere else. Or what's the quality of the staff that you're going to be able to hire, right? Right. And so, there's, I think, a lot of pressure. I don't know, how many of you believe your districts have a tolerance for increased bill back so you can give a fair raise? Yeah, hand up in the back. Yeah.
So I'm from Success, everyone in school knows, and just to kind of shed a little rainbow within that cloud. So the 40 million that we got this year was due to a conversation that Peter and Sandra started with the governor's office, wherein they asked them to open up the funding formula in recognition of everything that you were just talking about. We know that that's very hard for a lot of counties. They're in really rough positions. They're having to siphon from certain programs to give salary increases. They're having to shut down other programs that are not considered discretionary, and there just isn't money for it anymore. So one of the genius members of FASC who came up with this incredible formula that's very kind of difficult to understand, but would hypothetically, bring most counties up to their reserve level so that they would at least start getting COLA increases. And the governor's office was engaged in the conversation, but not interested in making, that move this. However, we feel like the 40 million that we were given was indicative of their willingness to continue that conversation and to, reopen next year, and then, again, it's not until next year, the year after that. So we're hopeful that by 2016, 2017, there will be another conversation that opens up the formula and alleviates some of that burden, because we realize that a lot of counties won't get any additional funding till 2020 or 2021 if we don't do that. So we're trying.
Yeah, and that's great. There are a few things going to probably work against you. Politics is one of them, because it would mean, where's that extra money going to come from? Out of Prop 98, right? So there are probably going to be some pushback for that. But if we have a recession and as those temporary taxes fall off, now would seem to be the time to do it, right? Yeah. In a year where you have lots of money is the time to fix problems. When you don't, very, very challenging. But so yeah, a lot of pressure on county offices for sure. County office squeeze. How many of you are already getting pressure from your districts to maybe want to take special education programs back?
Well, that's been happening since already.
Yeah. Happens even in good times, right? Good times, Kathy.
I can't remember good times,
Can't remember.
There.
So lots of pressure. I wish I had an answer for you.
I
But
mean,
you know,
it's better to know the worst, because I think that, like our county, I think has already projected, 5 years out. And I think if I'm correct, our county in some respect is already deficit spending. So there might be other counties like that, but after 5 years out, there's no answer. In other words, there's no answer to the existence of the county.
I think a lot of counties are doing that. If they have really high reserves, they're just thinking, well, we're just going to ride this out, right? Because at full implementation of the LCFF, what's going to happen? School districts also are just going to get the statutory COLA every year. Okay, they're not going to have these big bumps, these big revenue increases. And so then you're going to kind of all be on a level playing field. And so I'm sure there are lots of counties doing just that. Can we get through these years until full implementation by spending down reserves? But yeah, that's a bit
I
of a
think the
slippery
critical
slope.
piece is going to be how well the county offices perform in approving those LCAPs and what kind of gains students are going to be making. That's going to me, that's going to be what the legislators will be looking at. What kinds of gains does student make? And if they don't make gains, it's going to be the county office that it falls on. They're going to say, well, you guys didn't do your job in approving those LCAPs. And that's what I think that's going to be the proof of the pudding right there. If we don't do the job.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we had a whole section in our May revision workshop about a 30-minute presentation on LCAPs and sort of the evolving nature of those. And, you know, school districts are going to really have to, there's a lot of work to do in learning really how to measure increased and improved services to students and how they are demonstrating that they're getting improved results. And so, you know, we have, I think, many years to go to really even determine if this local control funding formula and LCAP experiment are going to work, right?
Well, and look at in terms of in past times, CDE has always been the one that kind of evaluated that stuff. They've given it all to the county offices now, so the pressure's on to do the job of approving those LCAPs to see what kinds of gains students are going to be making. So it's up to us to make sure it happens.
Yeah, and you have to give CSS a lot of credit. I mean, they've done a lot of work to really develop rubrics that counties can use and looking at and evaluating, because the statute and the regulations are intentionally vague. Okay, because it's all about local control and local governing boards having broad discretion. But at the end of the day, you know, somebody's still got to check off a box whether you did or didn't make progress, right? Or whether you did or didn't have goals in all 8 state priority areas, for example. And so that responsibility has fallen to county offices to create sort of these black and white rules in a gray world.
Well,
and so it's a big challenge.
Reading a map, where we are there, it's going to be, that's what we're going to be evaluating.
Yeah. So, well, I'm already over my time, but let's just spend a few minutes talking about the Special Education Task Force. I won't go through the rest of the slides. You have them and can look at them, and feel free to email me. I think my email address is on the very last page. I'm happy to try and answer any of your questions if I can. But you're probably all very aware of the Special Education Task Force report. You also know that there are some proposals in the governor's May revision to give some new dollars for special education, and they would be ongoing dollars. But primarily those dollars are being used to kind of expand existing infant programs, as well as increase the number of slots in state preschool, with priority being given to kids with disabilities. And so I don't know if we can really call that a special education proposal. And it is to give some dollars to really support development and implementation of early intervention programs in general education that provide those multi-tiered systems of support that the law requires that you have before you refer a kid to special education. Again, I don't know if you can really call those dollars for special education. Certainly we know for and this is applicable really more to school districts, that the better interventions or early interventions you have, the fewer kids who are going to ultimately be referred to special ed, particularly those on sort of the learning disability side. That's great. It's really great. And some of it is very aligned with the special education task force report. But the special education task force has come out really opposing the governor's proposal, because where do we really need new dollars to go? We need new dollars to go to equalization, because you probably all know that the dollars that are coming to you through the AB 602 formula are different for every SELPA. There's great disparity in fundings for SELPAs. And so really the Special Education Task Force believes that I think it's like $61 million that's going to come to special education this year. We need $324 million to truly equalize funding across SELPAs. But at least that would be a good start. And so the Special Education Task Force is really lobbying for those new dollars to go to equalization and not to some of those other things that, while they're aligned with their report, aren't really where they think the dollars should be spent. And so it'll be interesting to see if between now and an enacted budget, if we see some movement on the part of the administration, and more importantly, the legislature, to really move those dollars into equalization. Yes.
This may be a long answer, and I don't really, I'm not looking for that. Why is it so inequitable right now? I mean, I'm sure there's some history to that makes sense at some time.
It really purely is history, and when those, remember back to base revenue limits and why it's kind of like LCFF came to be, because there was this great disparity between base revenue limit funding, which is one of those things that it was set at a particular period in time based on cost of living, regional factors, all these things that make this complicated formula. And you go, that's what it is, this period of time, and we're going to keep it the same forever and ever, amen, right? So the LCFF really was to equalize base funding per ADA across the state, total equalization, and we'll be there when it's fully implemented. And I think, we need that same kind of equalization in special education. There's and so again, I think, I don't know how likely it is. So all of you need to be working with the Special Education Task Force, with those who are representing SELPAs. They do have a pretty strong voice in the Capitol, and we should probably be really pushing for those dollars to go to equalization. Yes.
The task force is over. We're no longer meeting.
Right, but the SELPA organization, as we also have the Special Education Coalition for Adequate Funding, so both of those groups, through those groups, we should be working. Although they did issue a letter. They did issue a letter just yesterday. Now, I got an email that said that the Special Education Task Force sent a letter of opposition to the governor, because the proposal didn't have any dollars going to equalization.
Carolyn was on the task force.
You were on the task force?
Yeah. And you didn't know about that letter?
Did you say?
Well, that was
It may have come from the co-leaders.
right. Maybe but there is a letter. I saw it yesterday.
I know several EMG members. I know that before they concluded, the task force put out a letter urging the governor to address equalization. And I know that EMG, they had a meeting that I was in where the EMG members agreed to respond to that letter. So I don't.
So maybe
The one that I saw.
and EMG is the education management group, which is all of the alphabet soup of AXA, CSBA, CASBO, and others who lobby on behalf of education management groups. So, well, I'm way over my time. Yes.
The early intervention dollars, Do we know what that means? Does that mean any of those dollars should go into DDS? Are they for J50 or are they for J50 and low incidents?
Yeah.
What are the intervention dollars for?
So let's go back. I think that was on, was that on an earlier slide? No. What slide was that on? Where's the dollar amount?
Right there.
60.1 million.
30 million.
Ah.
Early intervention preschool.
All right, so those are split up and some of it's ongoing and some of it's just one time. So 30 million to augment existing early education programs for infants and toddlers. And as I remember reading the governor's budget summary, I think that is to existing programs.
We know
Not,
that, but
okay.
what does that mean?
I don't know.
Is it for our early start stuff, or is it to places who are running state preschools?
you know, I don't know. Now, if you just look at the governor's budget summary, you're not going to get that level of detail. You have to really go to the budget trailer bills. And I haven't had an opportunity to do that because they didn't come out before we hit the road for our for our workshops. But I will take that question, and if it's okay, Leslie, can I look into that, craft a response? I'll send it to Leslie. We'll probably also school services. You know, we always have Ask SSCs, and we'll have a lot of those articles that will come out on the heels of these workshops, and so we'll do our best to publish an article too that gives a little bit more detail. But until you look at the budget trailer bill, there's really no way to know. So I'm sorry, I don't have that answer for you. I'll get it to you though. Okay. Okay. And would you do me a favor of sending me an email and putting the question in email so I don't forget? Would you do that? All right,
Your
great.
name
Thanks.
is here, but your contact information is on the
Oh,
back
okay.
page.
Let me give that to you then. My email is my first name, SUZANNE, last initials S, at sscal.com. Yeah, so when you go home and you have an opportunity to look at the rest of the slides, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll do my best, even if I don't know. I'll talk to others. I'll do the research myself, and I'll try to get those answers for you. Okay.
Okay.
All
Suzanne,
right.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, so we have about, we have a 15-minute break on the agenda. What if we make that a 10-minute break?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be back and start at 10:25.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Ours came back with big binder.
Thank you very much.
No worries. No worries. I will. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That the district.
Yeah, I've got my.
It's a lot easier to say. Written.
Just wondering, is it early intervention? Yeah.
Well, that's better. Literally. All right.
I can. I'm not gonna use my eyes.
You can do it.
I can, I will.
What's that? It's like, today.
Yeah. Catch up a bit.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, 8.5.
8.5 in a day.
8.5.
I'd actually. Rest.
What you need?
No, I'm just figuring out which side to stand on.
Oh, okay.
One every half hour.
So it's like,
Yeah. It's-
Well, I'm a teacher in
Tired,
forms,
tired.
This side.
and 2/3 of them, I wrote last year, and I was on computer forms, so we know what I'm gonna be doing.
Yes.
even strawberries, but I never know.
Good luck. Money.
I'll get.
Yeah. One way or the other.
Oh, like the.
Microphone.
Ooh.
Can I get out?
Wow. Oh, okay. I was gonna diss them, but now I won't.
Yeah.
So, for the July meeting.
Oh, yeah, everybody. Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
guess we're-
Yeah, it's a planning
Yeah.
session for the rest of the year. Online,
So we
so
got,
that-
yeah. It's a great, it's in Orange County.
I saw Rich there at Disneyland.
Let me.
I was walking right next to him. Yeah, you should come.
Because she.
No. Well, no, because the strawberry hasn't changed in that strawberry.
Thank you.
But, they, yeah, I've never gone, but. The garlic. Oh.
We talked about it, but when I was going to do take that email list and see if we could get them together. And see if we could. So we'll be on track.
I don't know what I really is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's straight enough?
Yeah, that's good.
My OCD is not.
No, you're doing good. Although you're, is it me or your name is a little fuzzy?
That's the font.
That's where your name
Okay.
goes now.
It's you.
It's funny.
Okay, just so I know.
It's just the keystone is weird. Oh, well.
Where are you? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do it on national.
Oh, you do, we're good. Do you have dogs?
Yes.
Oh, you do?
This time I'm hiring. I'm dropping off.
So a lot of training that. I know absolutely nothing about that, or what on TV.
I go home and do.
Oh, yeah. I go home. Okay.
Yeah.
What is your response? Okay. Are you? I have a box.
When pigs fly.
I'm totally
Joe's a
not.
boxer.
Okay. Just getting over it, but you brought it back up, so there we go.
That was my morning on his
Oh, yeah.
When we're up and they to bed, they jump up on the bed.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
yeah.
she would have her own quick size bed.
Oh, yeah.
Easy.
Mine sleeps on it all night. In the morning, she takes over.
So it's in the middle of the night,
So,
like
the
it's
middle of the
on me.
pillow.
Yeah.
I can't even see her every time when I walk in the room, because I have a bunch of them. She was right in the middle.
So do you read? You do?
Left over from the work.
One day we'll get them. She literally pulled it up. Like,
Yes.
when she gets so excited, she
Oh,
goes,
yeah.
and she manages.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
They do.
The elbow concept.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to get them.
She,
They have,
you walk, for your dog, she's just like, she's scared of it. She just wants to play. She's so excited. In the house, she's grabbing order, but out, that's why we.
there you go.
My dog, like, the other day, she didn't even know.
She was playing, right?
Yeah, she's playing the other dog with issues, so just trying to attack her.
Yeah, no, that's all she wants to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just her boss was good.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And mine's neat. I mean, I see, you're seeing something, I've seen her really empty.
Yeah.
Okay. She's like old lucky kind of, you know, and she's, I picked her up a little bit, because she was a little too, but she's pretty. I want to volunteer.
What's this? It's just a series of wonderful photographs. Fake.
Right. Oh, she's like a bullet. She feels like a grass. She Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Focus their attention. Right, on something, right?
Yes.
As I was ruining my garden.
She does them?
Yeah, she's about 3. I mean, we're like in the house. People didn't want her to help you.
Yeah.
She would just jump on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. She learned that, and now it's the second year, so it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did that at the beach for that reason. I'm a little anxious.
More details.
Exactly. I love that. And she can still come and help me, she has like a shih tzu too. Oh, and she just doesn't go sit on the floor.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think she would do it.
That's what you were saying.
I love that.
See, that's good. I don't take my dog.
Yeah.
They can't
Competing.
Yes,
They
they
gotta
can't.
look top notch at every moment.
Also, yes.
And send you a set.
And it's pretty box.
So, that's great.
But I heard it come on Wednesdays. You would have to come on Wednesdays.
Well, that's fine.
We're here. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're gonna come, are you coming down in July?
I know when I got older.
They're-
Because it helps me to understand.
Yeah, I used to have, well, I used to have a golden and Cocker Spaniel.
I'm gonna do it right now.
Okay, Cocker. Cheryl, 6 hours. Is that okay? Sure.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm good at taking notes.
There you go. That works, thank you.
Yeah, that's primarily what it is.
Okay,
Are yours talkers? Mine
I
is
just want to
talkers.
put some more candy, that's all.
Cheryl.
Any time for a walk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Go to,
You know,
present the
you really need to
conferences.
present, just keep running this.
I know, I know.
That's what I mean, people love the show and they go, oh, we're going, we don't want the presentation. This is fine.
Absolutely. Seriously.
Yeah, it's in a gated community in Florida.
Really?
This one's inappropriate.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'm sorry to put an end. Yeah, that's so kind of funny.
Hey, they were all very well behaved.
That was just a snapshot though.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello? That's me.
That works, and that works. Good.
Good.
Okay, should we wait?
Well,
Sorry.
I think she's gonna introduce you. Are you gonna introduce? Are we gonna introduce?
Shall we introduce Pete? I will introduce Pete.
Okay.
Pete and I have known each other for many, many years. We both worked together in San Diego Unified. He was the director of transportation and I was the director in the special ed department. And, you know, there's always an interesting relationship that happens between transportation and special ed, and it usually starts out like this. Somebody's blaming somebody else. And so Pete and I started working together and working very collaboratively. And really, Pete would do amazing things at really analyzing data and looking at things and asking questions about, you know, who are the kids that are going to be transitioning from middle school to high school? And then we'd start to look at so many different other things. we got to a point where if there was a letter that was going out to families, we both signed it. We never had anything that went out with one of, if it had, especially if it had to do with transportation, both of our names were on the letter. And we would come up with frequently asked questions, especially during those transition times or school startup times. And Pete will tell you probably a story about some of the comments that we got from folks, parents especially, or staff, when they would call and get the same answer from whoever answered the phone. And he went on to be the director in Newport Mesa. And I then left because he left. I left San Diego Unified and went to the county office. But we still work really closely together because one of the things that we really understood was that relationship between transportation and special ed has to be the strongest relationship that you have. And Pete, thank you for coming. He's done amazing things and truly believes that transportation is a related service, and that's how we have moved forward.
Thank you, Carolyn. So our plan for today, I'm going to spend the first 45 minutes or so going through some myths, because actually I've done the myth presentation for transportation people, similar myths but slightly differently. So this is for special educators, and it's amazing how many myths are out there. So we're going to do that for a while. If you have questions, concerned if I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know. I don't get frazzled when I get interrupted. And then after that, I'm going to give you the sneak peek of a program we've been working on called the Bus in the Classroom, where we bring transportation staff to special needs classes and literally teach kids transportation skills, 5-year-olds to 19-year-olds. And that stuff is really, really good. And I want your feedback, because I was here about 3 or 4 years ago, and some of you look familiar, but it's old age. I don't remember people anymore. But I'm real good at bluffing it now. So I showed you stuff that we were just beginning then, which is moving kids away from curbside service and the whole applying the educational model to transportation. And if we don't meet the standard, then we stick more goals in the IEP. We push the student towards a more independent role and move students away from curbside service. You gave me feedback that helped me sell that. When we get to the next presentation, I'm going to still tell you, yeah, we sold it, people love it, but it's not happening. So that's why the Bus in the Classroom is the next thing. So let's go through some myths. And there were so many, I had to boil them down. If you think you know something that's a fact, but you're not sure, spit it out and we'll talk about whether it's a myth or not. In terms of my qualifications, I am, let me see, on the National Standards Special Needs Writing Committee right now in Iowa, and I am here instead because actually we only had 3 revisions to the national standards from 5 years ago. So it wasn't worth going to Iowa. I am, that wasn't meant in a bad way, but I do have in-laws from there. So. I am also, let me see, I'm on the National Board of Advisors to the Transporting Students with Disabilities Conference, the National Special Needs Committee for Transportation, et cetera, a bunch of qualifications. I was Casto's special needs chair for 10 years, but I told him I would do it for 10 years. Done. Okay, so regardless of your political affiliation, this is a darn good quote. Because those myths, if you say them frequently enough, they become fact. And then people act upon facts that are not true, and that leads us to lawsuits. Which, oh, by the way, I'm also an expert witness now. Which, so if you want to do those things, I actually could make some money off of it. But it's out of state, it's not California. Okay, so I've divided them into sections. Data, because I used to be an IT manager between transportation director and transportation director. I was an IT manager in the middle. The myth that transportation is never satisfied. Because the transportation version is special ed is never satisfied. And the fact is, quit whining. You know, we could always do better.
Yeah.
And if you take that as, well, they're never satisfied, then you're not likely to do better. InfoMaker is a perfectly good database. This is for you, Carol.
Well, I think you're talking about FileMaker.
Oh, FileMaker. Oh, gosh. I will fix that. My bad. You tell how conversant I am with Apple products. I did listen to my Nano on the way up. Databases, there's a tendency for people to say, well, it's not in the database. The data help us reflect the world. And we, speaking as a former IT manager, if the data is wrong, then fix it. But don't say I have to rely upon it when I know it's wrong. And I see that in transportation departments all the time. Well, that's what special ed sent us. He's 19 years old. He's not in a car seat anymore. You know, use common sense. Well, you'd be amazed how rare common sense is. And there are multiple other sources. One of the tricks I tell people about in terms of verifying special ed data is the health services people know about every student who is prone to seizures in the district. So even if special ed doesn't, or if special ed does, but it's not in their database or whatever it is, contact health services. They will provide you with a list. Actually, first thing they'll say is you're not entitled to it because of HIPAA, right? And then we will point out to them that HIPAA doesn't apply in educational settings. FERPA does, and yes, we're a related service, so send it to us, please. Once you get past that, they'll send you the data, and then you can match it against special ed and your database, and make sure all three of them are synced. So the way selfish transportation people work is they get the update, they update the transportation database. They never notify special ed. So next year when you send me the data again, it's still wrong. Well, that's just dumb. I mean, even if you don't get along well with your peer in special ed, be selfish about it. You want the data clean because it makes your life easier as a transporter. And from your side as a special educator, it makes your life easier as well. They're not entitled to the health data. I just gave you the FERPA HIPAA thing. By the way, the FERPA and HIPAA in transporters in general have no clue what either of those two mean. And so when somebody in the school district or the county office says you're not entitled to that data, and they go, well, it's in blah, 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 blah. It's just like, you know, the Charlie Brown talk. Wah, 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 wah. You can't have the data. That's really what they hear. And they don't have enough confidence in their role as a related service to assert themselves and say, no, I'm entitled to that data. So part of my mission at coming to these sorts of sessions is to get you guys on board. And I do this over and over and over again with transportation people. But it's, you know, you feel like you're kind of spitting into the wind, that you're not making any progress. But I think we slowly are. People are starting to recognize. When they reauthorized FERPA last, it specifically listed transportation as a related service. That was because our committee wrote a letter and said, please, otherwise we're arguing and they just won't believe us. So they'll use common sense, and the they'll means transportation people. Not likely. And the more you look, the more you find things that don't make sense. So it is very common in our districts that students now have restraining orders attached to their services, right? Split custody things and a variety of things like that. More and more we get that. That one piece of data is nowhere near the service data about the student with special needs. So because the student is reasonably functional and has been working on his independent skills, we don't require that student to be met at the bus stop. On the other side of the database is this giant red flag that says, don't let this kid go on their own because the person who is restrained from that student will get access to that student. It makes no sense to release the student and have a red flag. But if you don't use common sense to put those two things together, it'll happen. And then you'll find out the hard way, which is obviously not where we want to be. And I say that because transportation, neither does special ed. Thinking that way, though, helps you serve kids better. Database is synchronized. This is one of my favorite ones, because back before Carolyn asserted herself, the regular year database and the extended year database only had one thing in common: the word database. Right? And for whatever reason, because the extended year stuff's really on a spreadsheet, the regular year stuff is in a database. The regular year database gets updated. The extended year database doesn't. And that's how you end up with 10th graders in car seats and weird things like that. They will not automatically synchronize. You have to force them to synchronize, or get your IT people to do that. The challenge there is you have to speak like an IT person to get the IT people to do that. That's hard. That's why I had a job as an IT manager, because I could talk both languages. But you have to insist, paint the picture of what you want it to look like, and let them do the hard work. Okay, so an example, I was at, how do I word this? There were 3 lawyers who descended upon one of our schools due to one angry parent. And that led to the need to have community meetings with our special needs community. In addition to the CAC meetings, we had to have these meetings with these angry parents. And they said, okay, which of the departments should we attack first? Oh, let's do transportation, because Pete travels all over doing presentations. He could just brush them away. You know, he can handle a tough crowd. Well, not really. The way I handle a tough crowd is I can always walk out. But one of the parents, partway through this, said, my child had a seizure last year on the bus, and you guys didn't do anything for 4 or 5 minutes. And so I said, well, where was your child sitting? Oh, he was sitting in the back of the bus. And I said, well, if he was sitting in the back of the bus, then we didn't know that your son was prone to seizures. Because when a child is prone to seizures, they sit in the front row opposite the driver, the most visible spot on the bus for the bus driver. We didn't know. Did you tell the school district that your child was prone to seizures? And then her language got, whatever language she was speaking, she no longer spoke English. So it was, and she quieted down. We can't read minds, same thing you guys say. But it pointed out to me that there are so many places where critically important health information or service information does not get through. So I spent a few minutes drawing up the seizure presentation and sent it out to all of our special ed administrators, all of our healthcare people, and said, hey, we need to do a better job, because there's so many places where the ball can get dropped. So it starts with the parent. If the parent doesn't notify anybody, we don't know about it. In this case, after much research, the student hadn't had a seizure for 1.5 years, and she really didn't want the parent didn't want any additional services to hinder her child's recess time or playtime. So she didn't mention it. So the parent could drop the ball. Or the parent could tell the nurse, and the nurse goes, I'm the only person who needs to know about this because I'm the nurse. And everything healthcare related happens to the health professionals. Not true, obviously, right? It could have gone to the teacher. Now, does the teacher update the district's database? Probably not. Maybe the teacher mentioned it to the office manager who enters it? Probably not. So maybe it got dropped. It could have, I know there's a tough audience here, it could have been dropped by special ed. Somebody. Funny thing, we just hired a driver named No Way. N-O-E, No Way. It's true. So special ed could have dropped it. They could have entered it in the summer database and never entered it in the year-round database. Or it could have gone to transportation and we dropped it. That it showed up in a database, but it never got put onto the driver's manifest. So the driver never modified it. Or it did get put on the driver's manifest, but the updated manifest was never given to the driver. Or any of a million things there, a million ways where it could break down. So there are so many places where the data could go bad. Yes, ma'am.
Our transportation people are saying because it's a related service that they should be invited to the IEP meetings. Is that, are you going to be covering that, or is that?
I'll cover that right now. They should not be invited to every IEP. They should be invited where there is an issue with standard service being exceeded. So if they publish here are our standards, here's what we do, here's how we do it, hold us accountable to that standard. And then we have a request that says, this student needs to go home an hour and a half early. I probably should have transportation there because maybe it's not an hour and a half early. Maybe it's just an hour and a half shorter day. And it's more efficient to have the student come in late rather than go home early. Or those kinds of things. And you can't tell until you actually meet and discuss it. Very frequently people say, oh, transportation is a related service, I'm going to invite them. And you show up and you go, okay, what's the issue? Oh, nothing, you're just, the student needs transportation. So, and ask them, maybe they can, now the laws have been loosened a little bit so we really don't have to be at an IEP to make a decision about things that show up in the IEP. So for example, let's say the student's in a safety vest, but the student is unclipping their safety vest because they're a Houdini. Well, we can put a buckle lock over the clip. That doesn't merit an IEP. It does merit being recorded in the next IEP. But if we have an agreement between the parent, the case manager, and the transportation people, you can write it in. Okay, so evacuation. This is particularly a problem in California because our Department of Ed publishes that when there is an emergency, the bus driver is to evacuate the bus within 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. Okay, it's a guideline though. It's not a law. And there's a reason it's not a law, because it's crazy. It's not possible. If I only have one person on the bus, maybe I can do it in 2 minutes. But they say 2 minutes because if they said 5 minutes, there will be people who do it in 7. If they say 10, there'll be people who do it in 12. So, wheelchairs should be evacuated down the lift. That's a myth. In the event of a real emergency, if there's smoke in my bus, I am taking that student out of the wheelchair and evacuating that student probably on the wheelchair cover. The vinyl cover that covers that, put the student on there, drag him off the bus. And that may mean that student, and this is a quote from, I can't remember who said it, it's a quote from one of our conferences, better to break the student than to kill the student. Gee, you may cause, if the student has brittle bone or something like that, you may cause an injury, but they'll still be alive. There's a tendency, well, that's an expensive wheelchair. We can buy another wheelchair. Can't buy another child. Well, in the US, you can't buy it. So again, common sense not being common, we talked about the 2-minute guideline. So in our transportation departments, we stop at a group home. The group home has 5 children in wheelchairs. And we pick them all up on the same school bus. And then when there's an emergency, it's like Southwest Airlines. If you have 2 children, pick the one with the most potential. Right? That's not my joke, that's theirs. But that's what you would be doing. So we don't accommodate more than 3 wheelchairs in our district. And I recommend that when I teach this program from Montana to Florida. Because yes, it's more inefficient to have to send 2 buses to pick up that 4th chair or that 5th chair. It is. But liability-wise, you don't want to be that transportation director sitting on or that special ed director sitting on a witness stand where they go, you are aware of 2-minute guideline. Well, yes. And how did you think you could evacuate 4 or 5 students in wheelchairs within 2 minutes? And you'd go, I would refer you to Pete Nesley. He can help you. You don't have an answer because there isn't really one. Order doesn't matter. One of the things that one of my special needs credentials, we do things called rodeos, where they're bus driver competitions. And I am the behavior management chairperson for the National Special Needs Rodeo. So we create scripts of 3 or 4 kids, and then we let the driver and attendant deal with, this kid's got OCD, this kid's is oppositional, this student is prone to seizures, and we have our characters play the role and watch how they behave. A couple of years ago, we had a student who was a, quote, runner, or in special ed terms, had a propensity to elope. Right? I mean,
Yep.
he's a runner, cuz. Actually, I have some very funny runner stories. But the team, and we were in Kansas City, and the ground was frozen. It was a cold day, really cold day in Kansas City. And they evacuated the bus. Well, they evacuated the runner first or second. I see the smiles coming up. You guys, right? And this guy, who's actually a friend of mine, he literally is a runner. So he runs in marathons and stuff. So he's running across this field. And when the driver and attendant saw that happening, they both left the bus. So now there's nobody there with the students, right? And they're tearing across the field, and they're never going to catch him, right? So we're the misbehaving kids, and we're cheering, "Go, Chris, go, go!" So order does matter, and if you're counting on transportation people to know that, it's not going to happen. So very frequently, the teacher knows the students are running. Special ed database doesn't know that. If the special ed database doesn't know it, the transportation people don't know it. And crazy things can happen. Like a student running down Harbor Boulevard in Costa Mesa, peeling off his clothes as he runs. So when we asked the driver, is he the student with the gray sweatshirt? Because that's what, he never responded. About 5 minutes later, we said, "You must respond." What? Well, he's no longer the student with the gray sweatshirt. He didn't know what to say. Yeah, he was the student who had a gray sweatshirt. Okay, no evacuation training for special needs students. That is not true. And I hear this all over. Well, those kids are so fragile, you can't evacuate them. That may be true for some kids. They are so fragile that you can't evacuate them. Students, you do a tabletop exercise about how to be evacuated. You don't physically take the student who's gonna, you're gonna shatter his femur by taking him off the bus. You sit down and talk about, in the event of an emergency, here's what we're gonna do, here's what you do, here's what we do. But you still, by law, have to have that training. And the bus has to have a plan on how they're going to evacuate those students. It's legally required, even if it's not physically practiced. So you don't physically have to do it. In some states, you have to do it physically twice. Yes, ma'am.
Annually? Or?
Yes, annually. Most states actually have to do it twice per year, twice per school year. Here's another one that I didn't put on the slide, but again, it's an example of common sense not being common. So the purpose of the evacuation training is to make sure that the students are at least reasonably familiar with what to do in an emergency. So it would make no sense to conduct your evacuation training in March or April because the school year is pretty much over. Districts all over the state, the law doesn't say when you have to do it. We're busy in September and October. So we're going to do it. We'll do it over the winter break, or we'll do it in February or March. Well, that's just dumb. Yes, it's legal, but it's dumb. It really should be done in September, or October, no matter how busy we are. So the success of the evacuation isn't only a transportation issue, it's anybody who serves that student. And, okay, operations. Parents may ride the bus. It is true, there's no prohibition for parents to ride the bus. We make our parents sign a waiver, and we do not allow parents to ride the bus where their child is riding that bus. Because then that parent is going to become an advocate for their child, regardless of what's going on. And we're not in the parent transportation business, we're in the student transportation business. So by law, we do have to provide access for the parent to get to the IEP meeting. There have been times, under very rare circumstances, where we would bus a parent to the IEP. Not if there's other kids on the bus. We're not going to do that. So it's not recommended. I get this from special ed people all the time. How come that student isn't in a car seat? Because there is no law requiring a car seat for 6 and 60 like there is in cars. School bus is built like a tank. There's all sorts of safety precautions. Car seats are just extra equipment for the very vast majority of students. It's just an extra expense. Doesn't make them any safer. There are a few students where it does make them safer. Typically preschool age kids, they really should be, from a support perspective, in a car seat. I'm talking real quick. Please don't let that dissuade you from raising questions or concerns. But I want to get to the fun stuff. You must have an attendant. That is definitely not the case, especially in California. In some states, that is the case. California eliminated that long, if it was ever there, they eliminated it before I got into transportation. So that had to be long ago, we put it that way. Would it be a good idea to have an attendant on routes where students are very fragile or where there's what we call critical mass? Yes, it definitely would. We put a lot of students with special needs on the same routes as general ed students, which is what the law wants us to do. Having said that, there are times when you don't want to mix without having another set of eyes there to help the driver. So if I've got the junior high kids and I've got a 5th grade or a 3rd grade student with an oppositional disorder, let's say, boy, that's not going to work. Because those junior high kids are going to pick on that kid to begin with. And this kid is not going to back away. He's going to fight back and it's going to blow up. So you have to use common sense in that regard. One of the things that we do to save a bunch of money is we assign attendants in advance of the problem. So our ED class, we've got fifth grade ED class, actually 2 of them. So we have 22, 20, whatever the number is. There's roughly 10 in each of these classes. 18 or 16 of them are riding the bus together. If I don't have another attendant on that bus, I mean, look in the classroom, the teacher's got 4 aides, right?
Yeah.
Right? On the bus, the driver's facing the other way with no attendant. You don't do that, you'll end up having IEP meetings and have to add one-on-ones for every single one of those. But if you can put an attendant on in advance because you anticipate the need, that's great stuff. I can tell you in my district, our special ed department pays for my bus monitors because we're saving them so much one-on-one time by doing it right. 6 students should be bused home. I would say as a last resort. We are not a medical transport. And over again, there's court cases up the yin-yang of districts trying to do the nice thing and the students really ill and they have an injury when they're on the bus and now the district's, and the first thing the lawyer says is, are you a medical transport? Well, no. Our drivers have first aid training. Yeah, but they're driving the bus. Meanwhile, the kid seizes or whatever else. I mean, it could get very ugly. Special ed and gen ed are okay on the same bus. We talked about that. They can be, but you need to keep your eyes open as to, is this mix going to work? One of the strategies that we've used is we appoint a bus buddy. We ask, we don't just say, you're the bus buddy for this student. But if you can get somebody from the general ed population to work with that student in the special ed population, it could really work. And there's really, in other stories, which I won't share here, there's story after story of really positive stuff happening. And a lot of districts are doing that as community service for their high school kids, if they're doing PBIS and one of their core values is caring for others. So yeah, it's fun stuff. So it's good for the gen ed population as well. So one of the myths that I used to believe in was that the classroom's got the answer, and that's why I need to be at the IEP, so I can find out what the answer is to this child's extreme behaviors. And then I started going to those IEPs and found out that they were just as clueless as we are, in some cases. In other cases, we have the answer. So we have a student who is, let's say this politely. I knew his name, and I'm the director. I shouldn't know this child's name because he was always having behavior issues. And nobody knew what the solution is. And our driver realized that it was actually separation anxiety with the parent. Single dad, didn't know how to parent. Nobody ever taught him how to deal with a student with special needs. Student was reasonably severely autistic, needed a set schedule, as almost all autistic students have, and dad didn't know that. Well, we changed that dad's life when the bus driver noticed that the student's fit, for lack of a better term, which lasted evidently 2 or 3 hours. He was not teachable in the morning. When the driver saw that the student was always looking to where the dad was as he was screaming and yelling when he got on the bus, the driver told us, we showed up at the IEP meeting, we threw that out on the table, asked dad, what do you separate from your child? And he goes, what do you mean? Well, actually, we had to wait for him to calm down. The apple doesn't fall far, right? We've heard that. We had to wait for the dad to calm down, and then we could explore things. And as it turns out, the dad had no clue. So we bought the dad a $3 clock. Our behavior specialist drew up a chart for the dad to follow with the student, changed his life. It was that simple. Had the driver not noticed it, they'd still be pitching fits. And actually, there's a really good story. This dad didn't calm down, much like the student didn't calm down, only he turned into a raving fan. So he went to the school board. Everybody, if you turn in your card at the school board, you get your 3 minutes in front of the board. So he's up there talking about how wonderful we are. Well, and he's going on 5 minutes. And we have armed people that are, they had to escort him off because he was talking about how great we were. And it was all because the driver paid attention and noticed something. There's no way the teacher could have noticed it. They weren't on the bus. And that's where it started. Okay, so transportation might have the key. One of my pet peeves, sugar is a good reward. Wrong. I can't say that strongly enough. And what I have said, and only jokingly, facetiously, because, hey, that's the only way I'm going to get this kid to make it through the day, is I'm going to give him some sweet tarts at the end of the day or a candy or whatever. You sugar up that kid when they get on our bus, we're going to sugar them up on the way into the classroom. Okay? How would you feel? So sugar is a good reward for dentists. Support plans can only be used at the school. That is definitely incorrect. And nationally now it has caught on. I've been a preacher on that topic, I guess. And there's several people that are equally that way. We can have support plans that extend the classroom support onto the bus. We do it all the time. We transport 550 students with special needs. About 50 of them have bus support plans, which we don't call BSPs because there's 12 other places that BSP means something else.
When those when those behavior plans are being written, do you have somebody come and ride the bus with the students so that they can see to be able to write that report?
If there is a BIP involved, yes, because the law requires it, and I think the law needs to be changed, because we have cameras on our buses now. But nevertheless, that psychologist is going to get on the bus because the law says he or she has to. When they get on the bus, the behaviors change.
Right.
It's a dumb law these days because the technology has surpassed it. But so yes, we do invite them on. What we use, and I don't talk about it anywhere in this, cameras are wonderful tools. If you want to see what the antecedent to the outburst is, look at the camera. Most of our buses have 3 or 4 cameras on them. You can tell, and you can tell how fast the bus was going. You could tell whether it hit a bump. You could tell how noisy it was.
Is a camera a standard on all buses?
It is becoming that way. There is no law requiring it.
So one of the things that we might want to ask when we have that conversation.
When you get that bonus money,
Yeah.
the one-time money, that's a good.
But one of the conversations that we might want to have if we're having some challenges is there a camera on the bus?
And could you put one on even if there isn't, so that we can have a tool to, and I've gone to IEP meetings where the video, where nobody wanted to tell that parent that their little child is not the same she thought that child was. And nobody wants to have that hard conversation. One of the secrets to being in a successful partnership is I've fallen on that sword for my partner. They have to deal with, the classroom teacher has to deal with that parent every single day. I have to deal with them 2 or 3 times a year. I'll tell the parent no. It's easier for me to say that.
Do you have to get a release of information for everyone else's kids? To be videoed or,
That is correct. The new software will pixelize the student not there. So there's several camera companies. And what happens is this camera company gets it, and now these people are, wait a minute. So and it goes like that. So at any given time, the technology is moving quickly.
I see. So so you don't need, or you do still need release of information?
You do. Camera photographs are considered student records, so you have to handle them the same way you would handle student records. What we have done when that student wasn't isolated and we didn't have the pixelating software is we would give it to the principal to write a report, to view the video and write a report. The principal as an unbiased third party, and make sure the parent accepts that person as an unbiased third party, and then use that report to tell. I've been to an IEP where we had a student that was just a violent kid. Violent in PE, violent in APE, violent in the classroom. Was it really that boring? Violent in a whole bunch of places. Nobody wanted to tell mom. I showed the video to the case manager at the IEP. I brought the video. And what the student had done, one of our low performing aides, much like you have high performing students and low, I had same thing with aides. The aide got knocked off the seat and his glasses broken by the student giving the aide a backhand. And the student knew exactly what she was doing. She's looking out the window and drawing him in. He starts looking, and then she gets. It's a funny video, but it wasn't funny in the IEP setting. And it wasn't funny for our budget because he was out on workers' comp for 3 months. So. Yeah, but anyway, so cameras are a very helpful tool. They really are. And you will hear it depending upon what you read. ITP in some places does not mean individualized transition plan. It means individualized transportation plan. California has its own set of acronyms, which when I speak at national conferences throws people off. So we have what we call a BSP, but for national purposes, it's a bus student support plan, BSSP, because BSP means something different in everybody's state. But yes, we have bunches of them, and we review them regularly. we review them at the 11th month from the IEP, so that we have time to interview the drivers, we have time to ask to get invited to the IEP, and that kind of thing. Teachers are, yeah, I can send you, send me an email and I'll send it to you. Yeah, we have standard, in fact, I think I have a picture of the standard, just the easy one. Teachers aren't aware of all the behaviors because it's a different setting. What happens on campus stays on campus. Just not only in Vegas. So there is a sample transportation behavior chart. You will notice that there are 4 columns. So it's not just bus behavior, because as we say, it takes a village, right? So here's the classroom behavior. If the student is amped up at the end of the classroom, then the PM bus ride is probably not going to be the best, right? But if the PM bus ride is not the best, then the time at home might not be the best. This is a turnaround document. So we use a 3-part form and we pass it around so that the parent gets the report, but the teacher gets the report. If the student had trouble getting on the bus in the morning or was screaming and yelling at home, maybe the bus ride was okay because the driver didn't notice it. But then the student's misbehaving in class, the teacher can go, okay, this is an extension of the home behaviors. Okay, training doesn't expire is a myth. Once you know it, and we have laws that say you only have to be trained once in your entire life. So in our case, for controlled substances and alcohol recognition, anybody who administers a drug pool or works where employees are in the drug pool, you have to be trained on what to look for once. So you could have been trained when you were 22, and now you're 72. Different drugs are tested for, et cetera. That's the way the law is. And that's the most extreme example of training expiring. But realistically, there are videos out there. One of my best friends is the person who writes, she's the legal expert in our profession, about to retire. And she used to go around saying, hey, you know that video I made 4 years ago? Throw it out. It's not current anymore. Confidentiality rules have changed. Those kinds of things. And she was making more money because she had to buy the new video. She's still saying that, even though she's retired. So it wasn't all about profit. So training does expire. More training will solve weaknesses. And softball coach for way too long. Here's the phrase we use. Actually, we use practice, but only perfect practice makes perfect. More of it, if it's not correct, isn't going to help you. It should be aimed at complex issues. I hear this all the time. Well, what about the student who has this and this and this and this with that, and you go, wow, that's complex. Do you think I should spend all of my driver's times and my limited training resources training on that? Or should I train on things like checking for students who fell asleep on the bus, which happens? I think it'd be better to train on something that's likely to happen. And then pull in that individual driver or that driver and attendant and deal with that particular student's behavior. There's this myth that there has to be somebody who is state certified teaching that class. And since your state certified instructor doesn't know anything about special ed, then we're never going to train our people about special ed. They have to be there to certify that it was real training. That's it. They don't have to train. We frequently bring in people. In fact, when we get into the bus in the classroom, I'll tell you, one of the things we learned is that despite how good our relationship with special ed is, we do not train together frequently enough. We still train a bunch. We train more than most districts in the nation, but not enough, because the autism specialist spoke with us 3 years ago. And we learned some of the phrases that you use to correct students with autism. And our district across the board uses that phrase. So we use, that's not it. That's the phrase. We don't say no, we don't say wrong, we don't say try again. we say that's not it. We have trained our students that way, or instructed our students that way. We train animals, we instruct people. That's what our trainers say, at least. Our instructors, sorry. So we didn't know. I thought, hey, I got it 3 years ago when they talked to us, and my supervisors got it too. So we're all on board. No, as it turns out, the only people in transportation who knew that phrase were me and the 2 supervisors. Nobody else did. And it reminded me that we, pretty much they should have 15 minutes at every monthly meeting. So this coming year, we're going to have the autism specialist, an ED teacher, the deaf and hard of hearing person, etc. And they should be able to give us what you need to know about serving students with this disability or this combination of disabilities in 15 minutes or less. Because if it's going to be more than 15 minutes, we're going to ignore it anyway. Our drivers just, cup's full. They have enough room for 15 minutes. So one of the things that is kind of scary is that some states don't require as much training as California does for bus drivers. So Montana just changed their law, but for 3 of the last 5 years, they have to provide 3 hours of refresher training for their drivers. And I was their 4-hour presentation for 3 years. And I can tell you, I'm not dealing with extreme behaviors. I'm talking to them about how to do what's right for kids, how to be motivated, how to pay attention to the details. But that's not how do you deal with a student with this condition. And so they didn't get it. And they didn't get it again, and they didn't get it again. And when, God forbid, something goes wrong for that student with a tough condition, they're going to be in a lot of trouble because there will be a lawsuit, or there will be a due process complaint, or whatever it is, and they'll lose. Okay, very quickly, handling wheelchairs. The law in California says you only, well, first of all, CDE, the California Department of Ed, used to teach that it's okay to stand on the wheelchair, on the lift as the wheelchair is going up. Not okay. Not okay for students, not okay for drivers, not okay for attendants, not okay for anyone. If you read any of the manufacturer's specifications, no one is to ever stand on a lift when lift is in motion, ever, regardless of the student's condition, regardless of how big the wheelchair is, regardless of anything. You're not to do it. And as one of my clerks, I learned this phrase from her, should have learned it from my daughter, cray cray. All chairs, there's a national standard called WC19, which says chairs will be crash resistant to a certain whatever. They can be hit from multiple different sides. And they have tie downs that are secured to 20 times the weight of the chair and all this kind of stuff. Those chairs are wonderful to transport, and they're not always giant monstrosities. Some of them are fold up, look like strollers, but they're wheelchair, they're WC19 tested. That is not a national standard yet, and it's not a state law yet, but it will be coming because they're the right chairs. Yes, sir.
What about a student that uses a walker, but not a wheelchair, but doesn't have the strength in his legs to get up the steps of the bus?
They need to be assisted up the steps. They are not to use the walker on the lift. And this, amazingly enough, again, common sense isn't common. I had to teach people that when you assist a student up the stairs, you assist from below. You don't assist from above. This at the National Special Needs Rodeo. 9 out of 10 of the teams were just waiting for their workers' comp injury or their injury to the student. So yes, it's much more difficult, and I understand exactly why you're asking that question. But nevertheless, you will, if something goes wrong, the manufacturer will say, don't blame us, we told you. The state will say, don't blame us, we told you wrong. Right? And then your district or your office will bear the cost, which is unfortunate. So WC19 is coming. There is now also WC18, which is how the tie downs are manufactured. The bus can haul equipment. So in that student who has a walker, how am I going to get that student to school? Where's the walker going to go? And you will hear from your transportation department, we don't transport equipment. Call, Beacons or somebody if you want equipment moved. No, we can transport it. Be secured to 5 times the weight of that equipment. Fold it up, tie it down with a wheelchair tie down, and you'll be fine. When they tell you, no, we can't do it, it's really, no, we don't want to do it, and you don't know enough to tell us that we have to do it. Hence the maybe. Any wheelchair or car seat is okay. That is not correct. And I've had countless battles over the brakes on the wheelchair are not functional. We will not transport the student in that wheelchair. Well, they can't get another one. Well, I'm sorry to hear it, but we will not transport you just repeat yourself over and over and over again. Go to Easter Seals. They'll give you a wheelchair temporarily while you're ordering another one or getting that one fixed. There's all sorts of community access options there. So when they say make it work, what they're saying is you take the liability. I don't know that you want to do that.
Have you ever had to push back on that?
Yes. Very much.
From a special ed department or a superintendent or anyone that says make it work, and you just make a stand? Is that what you do? Or come out with Easter seals?
Well, typically our relationships are such that they respect, that you earn the respect, and so they don't kind of force you to do crazy stuff.
Right.
But every time I say no, I give them a way we can get to yes.
Okay.
Right? Not everybody does that, and not all yeses are cheap.
Yeah.
But we're here to provide service, so we need to tell people how to get to yes. Sometimes fix the chair. Well, I don't fix the chair, and you have to repeat yourself, which is unfortunate, but you have to do the same thing. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question for you. So they come in from transportation and everything's fine during this school day. And then right as they get on the bus, something happens. You transported them in and getting home. So there's this discrepancy sometimes because they were brought in and everything was fine. And then just before they get on, I have people saying, no, you have to think, we're not going to take them now. So what's the stand on that?
Well, depends on the exact situation. I mean, we tell our drivers, do not break the law, no matter who tells you to do otherwise.
Is it usually behavioral? No, it's a wheelchair issue.
It's a wheelchair issue.
Yeah.
Well, typically that means the AM driver didn't pay attention.
Oh, exactly. And this is where the inconsistencies happen constantly. I'm trying to get a cohesive system with the transportation director and myself happening so that there's a checkoff. There's a disconnect with AM and PM for sure.
Yeah.
So just as a kind of a curiosity that I have, Diana has multiple districts providing transportation to her school. Do all of your county offices provide their own transportation, or are the districts providing transportation?
Districts.
So a lot of these folks are dealing with multiple transportation systems.
Yeah, one of the things we did in San Diego to get ahead of this problem is during the summer, we had our trainers, we had a team of trainers, go visit every student in a wheelchair, assess the wheelchair for transportation worthiness. Because typically, they don't always break just before they get on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
They broke when the student was at recess. They both broke when the student was on his way to class. They broke 3 months ago and nobody noticed.
Absolutely. Or the parent tinkered with it enough so that it didn't do anything. And just before,
Right.
like mishandling of the brakes or something like that, or the assistant did something with the brakes.
Right. And typically it is the brakes. I'd say 95% of the time, it's the brakes that have worn out or been broken.
Right. That's my 95% issue
Yeah.
with the brakes.
So I would try to get ahead of that and ask the drivers of the students in the morning to submit a report. You have 3 students in wheelchairs on your bus. I want you to tell me, are the chairs transportable? When you let that student off in the morning, what was the condition of that chair?
Well, we have.
And push it back on them. Because I'm telling you, it didn't break in the classroom every single time, you know.
Well, we have the being able to push forward and being able to push backward controversy here. You know, some people are saying, oh, it's safe because they're not rolling forward, and other people are just saying, oh, it's not safe because they're not rolling backward. Which one is it?
It shouldn't.
To me, it shouldn't be the way, right?
Correct.
Right? So
Well, but some of that is also how you tie it down. The lazy driver who does not want to tighten the wheelchair straps enough so that there is no play at all, then the brake comes. Then the brake becomes an issue, right? So the brake is the second way to keep the wheelchair from moving. The tie downs are the first way. Well, it's difficult to get those tie downs, especially on some of these giant monstrosity, 34-inch wide wheelchair things. So yeah, I could talk to your director, your transportation director, and give him some tips.
We've been working together. I just wanted to see if you had something in place already, but.
No, what I typically do is I put it back on the last person that transported this chair.
Yeah,
so, gee, the brake is worn way down. It didn't get worn way down yet during recess. So why did the AM driver not report it? And put it back on them. If you do that a couple of times and they realize, oh, when I'm pushing, when I looks like I'm pushing against you, I'm really pushing against my own people. Yeah, I mean, I would defend transportation people, but we make mistakes too, and some of our directors have no clue. Right. They were the last person holding the keys when the last director left, and now they're the director.
Thank you.
Sorry. So no limit on number of preschoolers per bus. Again, how do you evacuate a bus with 20 preschoolers in car seats when the bus is on fire? That's really expensive to deal with this problem, but we have to legally. Curbside services required? Not. Can't state that not enough. We'll talk about that in the next section. We are stuck with failure to meet. So when a parent is just not there because they're irresponsible or they have work issues or whatever, we track them. We have published a policy. It's in our parent pamphlet. You get the first strike, we call you and say, hey, you failed to meet your child. Second strike, we threaten you politely. The third strike, you get a letter and a phone call. The fourth strike, we call an emergency IEP meeting. There is no fifth strike. Because the fifth time it happens, we don't deliver the student back to transportation or over to special ed. We deliver the child either to Child Protective Services or to the police department. And we're tough as nails about that, and people care. If you are not capable of meeting your child 4 or 5 times, and it's December, so you get 3 months and you missed 4 or 5 times, I'm wondering if you're capable of being an appropriate parent.
You said you have a written policy or
Yeah.
practice? Can you share that?
Yeah, we have a special needs parent pamphlet that lays it all out so that people can't say, oh, we didn't know that. They still do. And we publish it in multiple languages and,
Send it home with registration packets.
Yeah, yeah, every single, well, now what we're doing is we're requiring a signature.
Oh.
So don't tell me you didn't get it. Is this your signature? Yeah, it's sad to have to do that. It really is. Okay, so you can enforce accountability. Students must be, one of the things we never talk to transportation about is there is an affirmative obligation for anyone who serves a student who potentially has special needs to refer that student for assessment. Whether it's a thing or it's a special ed thing. We serve students. In the general ed population, you got that kid who doesn't understand, sit down. Does he not understand because he's got a hearing disability, he's got a learning disability, he's oppositional, whatever. We have an obligation to report it. That's going to make more work for everybody. It really is. but it's what the law says we should do, and we really are here for kids. And I tell you, we had a very, very rich parent who sued the district, actually filed due process and sued the district, because his student was dyslexic, and they found out when he was in 6th grade. The district kept passing that kid along. Nobody asked for an assessment. All sorts of people served this student and could tell you he was dyslexic, but nobody did anything. Parent won and the parent didn't need the money. Parent was a multimillionaire, didn't need the money, but they said the district needs to be punished or they will continue to do this. So, curbside and released, that is our secret.